Business is easy until people get involved.
Having the humility as a leader to recognize that the problem is you, the leader.
You can only lead people as high as you are. You can only lead people up to your personal level. Well, welcome to the Consultant the Coach podcast. I'm here with my good buddy, Josh. How are you?
Doing great. How are you, sir?
I've had an amazing weekend.
Hey.
We're making progress. We just finished the Lencioni book and all the applications.
That's right.
And thinking what we were going to do next, I wanted to jump into what I believe is, at least among Christian spheres, one of the most influential Christian business books, least for sure within the last 10 years.
Yep.
We're jumping into Dave Ramsey's EntreLeadership, which is now over 10 years old. But great devotion going into it. What scripture do you have for us this morning?
Sure. Let's talk about 1 Peter 5:2. Shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but freely, according to God's will, not for the money, but eagerly. And I think that's a great devotion, right? Because it's reminding us that we're really all about things that are bigger than us. And when we lead businesses, it's not about the money, but it's about the families we care for. Dave talks a lot about that, just the importance of knowing that, your responsibility is large and your influence is much bigger than you think, right?
Way bigger. And that's why he uses that scripture verse to jump into this book, because it's not only, let's say you have a team of 10 or I have a team of 75. It's not even just those 10 people. It's those people, and most of them have significant others or spouses or kids. It is way larger than that.
Yeah.
And 1 Peter 5 says, shepherd the flock.
Yeah. He tells a good story in there too, right? About there was a company picnic where he had, I think it was, they set it up because they knew they had so many young families, something like 79 kids, 10 and under or something. And so there were kids just everywhere at this thing, right? And he was talking to his son about it, and his son wanted to leave, and he said, look, you can't leave because this is the responsibility we have as a family, that, as he said, if I screw up, these families are impacted. In fact, he told his son, if you screw up, right? and you go get, in trouble for something, it can impact these families. So, don't carry your responsibilities lightly, which I thought was thoughtful.
So I stumbled upon EntreLeadership. It was well over 10 years ago. I don't even know if I've told you this story. I was getting my second master's degree, and I wanted to leave the field I was currently in. I was, running a medical supply, and I was looking into moving back into full-time pastoral ministry, but I still had this business to shepherd. And I was driving back over to Seattle. Seattle is about 2.5 hours from Yakima, Washington, where we're at. And in the process, I stumbled upon this podcast called EntreLeadership. And the reason why I wanted to leave my business was because it was frustrating. I knew how to do things, but I didn't. I have an English history degree. I have a master's in divinity. I never had the business background that I needed to run a business. We had not yet. Otherwise you would have just been helping me left and right. I stumbled upon EntreLeadership, and what I loved about it is this is arguably the best book to help a business if you don't have an MBA. You have all the business degrees, and that's what I absolutely loved. Written in just plain old mom and pop language. It's just like if my dad knew everything about business, this is what he would be telling me. This is how you take care of employees.
Right.
So now I've read this book probably literally over 10 times because I also teach it to my staff. Yeah. Last night or this last weekend was the first time you read it. What was your first impression as you read it as a first timer?
Yeah, I thought it was great. To your point about helping businesses, I think one of the things that I like about this book is it helps to frame many of the problems small business owners are dealing with, right, in ways that you would never need to hire a consultant, right, which in some ways is a good thing, right, because, I work with a lot of large companies, very complex, messy problems. These are ones that require immense, some of the words he used around, sizing the problem or decision, good counsel, such as, take a big decision slowly, right? And obviously when you work with large companies and you get, large 7-figure, 8-figure, 9-figure decisions that I help them work through, right? You take those slowly, thoughtfully, right? As they should. And at the same time, he talked about, when he was a small company and had to make a $7,500 IT system or a phone upgrade or something like that was a big decision for them, right? it was a big decision, but you also shouldn't need to hire a consultant for that, right? And so
Absolutely.
I thought it was really helpful because it was a very helpful guide for a lot of the people I know, people I've talked to, worked with, who are, when they're in small companies and don't have the budget or the need really to hire a consultant for those large things. It gives them kind of that grounding of how do you go about doing this without that, right? Which is great, right? It sort of frees them from, with that MBA knowledge, like you said, for those smaller companies, and then where it begins to help, direction, put you in the right direction is, okay, now as your company grows and you get to certain levels, you're probably gonna need more help with some of that bigger stuff.
Absolutely.
But it gets you a lot further.
But it gets you from point A
Absolutely.
to point B, and I would even say from point B to point C. Now, by the time you get to point C, you're going to need a consultant. You're going to need coaches to get you to that next level. But it does a great job of getting you from A to B. Now, it was a couple weeks ago. I have a brand new handyman that does all sorts of work for me. The guy's just a rock star. He did not go to college, but just very smart kid. Been doing all sorts of projects for me. And I said, so he's like, hey, Erik, I can't work for you next week. I'm like, well, okay, awesome. That's fine. And he's always a man of his word. I'm like, well, where are you going? He goes, I'm going on vacation with my wife and we're going to California. He goes, we're going to Texas. I'm like, why are you going to Texas, man? Well, there's this EntreLeadership conference. Here's this guy. He's probably like 21 years old.
Yep.
His wife just got her salon degree or whatever it's called. She's running her own salon business. They came across this book, and the two of them are knocking it out of the park.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they're young in love, newlyweds, starting their own business. This is the perfect book, and even we'll get into this in the coming weeks because this is just the book review. Next week we're going to talk how you apply it to business, and then third podcast is how to apply it to our life application. So just as you skim the book or as you read the book, what I like about the book is it literally hits business 101 from point A to point Z. What was the best thing if you were starting your own business, let's say 10 years ago, and you didn't have your master's and all that you have your master's in, what would have stuck out to you the most and say, hey, that would have been really, really helpful?
I had a few things I thought were really helpful. One of the things I thought was really interesting in there was having the humility as a leader to recognize that the problem is you, right? The limitation is you, the leader. And I think that's particularly helpful because I've worked with a lot of clients who either, one, don't realize that, or by the time they realize it, it's too late. And whether they realize it or not, almost would say consistently a common theme for those who are in that CEO seat is it's a lonely seat. It's a very lonely seat. It's a hard seat to be in. And it's not, and there's reasons why the problems, I can't tell you how many problems I've found in organizations. This goes churches, nonprofits, for-profits, doesn't matter, right? When you sense a problem in an organization and you start not digging in on the problem, but you sort of start trying to feel out the tracer through like, where's this coming from? Almost always it's the CEO. 98% of the time. Something. It could be indirect, but you can follow it all the way to that CEO seat or a CEO decision that has legacy reverberations that they didn't see coming. All the time. I mean, I could give you example after example after example. So I thought that was probably the most interesting one, in just the sense that the sooner you recognize that you're the problem, and the sooner you recognize that the more you invest in your own ability to overcome your own deficiencies, the sooner you're going to. So that's where the investment's worth it in terms of a coach or training or the EntreLeadership conference or a number of other things, or books, reading books.
Because you can only lead people as high as you are. So let's just say on a scale of 1 to 10, you're a 4 leader or a 5 leader. It doesn't even matter where you're at. You can only lead people up to your personal level. Now, what's hard is you might have a great business idea and you grow it, and it's going to work up to the level that you have that idea. But then you come to a point where I need to scale. I need to get a little bit higher. Well, how do you do that if you're the top? If you're the top dog in your organization, or if you learned all that you can from those around you.
Right. No, and that's where he gives a lot of tips around time management and training, and there's a bunch of ways he sort of has you work through that. But I think that most organizations are sort of stuck at the top capacity of their particular leader, right? And I think that's just it's consistent. I mean, yeah, we could talk about.
And when I was young in my 20s, I got things, and I'm like, okay, we're going to do A, then B, then C, and things just kept going wrong. And I was like, why do things keep going wrong? Well, he says in his book, business is easy until people get involved.
Oh, gosh, yes.
You could have the most perfect idea.
Yeah.
Once people get involved, whether it be through their incompetence or their family or just weird stuff happening in life.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going to happen. And I would get frustrated beyond all get out. Now I'm like, okay, there are going to be problems, and it's beautiful. We're going to work through them. We have our goal. He has an entire chapter based on, hey, you start with a dream, but you end up with a goal. Where's our business going in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? We've had many podcasts on goals. And the thing I like about this is he just makes it very simple. It's A, then B, then C. This is not going to be your entire strat plan for your business. But for someone that does not have a business degree or it's just going to get you from point A to Z, a large overview of where you're taking your company.
Yeah, no, it gives you a good grounding for sure. Again, if you're starting a small business, if you're early in the entrepreneurial journey, if you haven't been to school and don't want to go to school right now, it sort of gets you that grounding, even though it's not complete replacement for it. I mean, there's lots of other benefits to MBA school I could talk about, but that's not what this podcast is about. But the it's a very helpful perspective. It helps talk through a lot of things. Like, people are not natural. Like, I appreciate that he recognizes people aren't usually naturally inclined to coming up with translating a dream to a vision to a mission to values to how then you spend your time. These are foreign concepts for most people. Right?
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
And what I also like about the book, he hits, there are main things such as encouraging others, how do you hire people, but then he even has a chapter on 3 things successful people never skip. And he's talking about contracts, vendors, and collections. And it's just a run-of-the-mill, because we're always so big into leadership and this and that. But I've learned a lot from him. How do I sign my contracts? When do I go to a lawyer? When do I not go to a lawyer? When is even working with vendors? Because our business buys millions and millions of dollars a year in durable medical equipment. Do we go with the cheapest wheelchair on the market? Do we go with the most expensive wheelchair on the market? Because there are a lot of things that come into play. Actually, to this day, I've never read another mass-produced business book that talks about vendors. And what he says is, with vendors, number one is trust. You've got to trust your vendor. Is their yes going to be a yes? Is there no? I've had many people say, hey, I'm going to give you a great deal on this. And it is for 3 months. And then I hand it off to my purchaser, and then they change the pricing on our business. I can't trust that vendor. And he talks a lot about trust, but then there's also the quality of what we're buying. And then price does come into play. You have to have all 3 of those. And he talks about those 3 components in working with vendors. And we know a business strategy, but I've seen many businesses go out of business because they have the wrong price or they can't grab what they need for inventory. Things like that. Absolutely fascinating with this book.
Yeah. What did you think about, so here's a question for you that I had about this book. Speaking of that, is one of the things, and I will admit I am a skeptic. One of the things I have about his curriculum, Financial Peace University, related to this, because he, so those who don't know, Dave has a big background in financial counseling and big business. When I picked this up, my initial skepticism was that I find Financial Peace University to be overly prescriptive. Right.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
exceedingly
there's
prescriptive,
7 steps.
right? It's very,
you got to do it 8
yeah, and if you call into his show, he's very much like, you got to do da-da-da-da-da-da. And those aren't wrong, but they're not the only way either, right? And so I always found that a little bit off-putting because I thought there was some other ways to do it. But anyhow, maybe that's because I'm a consultant. But anyhow, I was reading the book sort of with that lens of trying to figure out, and I'd be curious what you thought about it from where was it helpfully prescriptive? Where was it overly prescriptive? Speaking like vendors and contracts, because there's probably some very prescriptive ways to give you counsel, but there's probably other ways that I suspect, given his other materials, he probably has a
So I would say the most helpful prescriptive that comes out of this book is, I'm a Christian, but I'm also a Christian running a business in Washington State, which is one of the most liberal states in the United States.
Right.
And for me, it really, really helped me. How can I run a business in a God-fearing, God-honoring way, we're not a Christian business. And so he really ties in really good, strong biblical concepts, and he is spot on. I know he is he's a Christian. He also has a staff that keeps him pointed in the right direction. Now, where is it not helpful? It is just an overview of a book, and I think even he would say that. You can't talk about an entire business in, I don't know, what's this book? It's not that big. Well, actually, it is big. It's 300 pages.
300 and the thick pages, too. I've seen much less thick pages.
So, where is it not helpful? Well, it's just a brief overview.
Yeah.
And so, he would even say, you should not run your entire business based on one book. This is the overview. It gets you started. And that's where, and I wouldn't even say I have a problem with it. It's a great business 101 if you want to run a great business.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people will pick on Dave for his, never use finance, never use debt, never use... I think Dave's right, though.
Oh, I don't think he's wrong. I think it's just more narrow in times than it has to be.
It's very narrow. But even to that, our business doesn't take out any debt with the exception of our buildings. Just like if you were, he would say, don't use any credit cards until, unless we're a 15-year purchase on your house. Our business has done that, and it has been so freeing for our business because I don't have to worry, the financing is coming due on this, or what if the government does this?
Yeah.
It's been really, really helpful for our business.
Yeah.
And even when I look back, when I haven't followed his curriculum to the T, we've taken a little bit of debt here, a little bit of debt here. Even if it worked out, it didn't feel good.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the little lie that kind of gets you forward, but you don't feel good. And so the more I look at what he's teaching, I'm like, he's spot on in my humble opinion. I know we would disagree on that. Well, that's where I see it working and not working.
Well, and I think where I think he would agree is it's back to, I can't remember who you said this, but we talk a lot about this on the podcast, the hungry, humble, smart.
Yeah, that's Lencioni out of The Advantage.
Yeah, thank you. And I think one of the things I was struck by was he's, and this is a compliment to Dave, he's incredibly successful, therefore he's incredibly confident. And so the way he portrays the material is sort of like, hey, this is the way to do it, which again, not wrong. But what I would say to people who are listening to it, it's probably a good first book to read.
Oh, absolutely.
But the importance of staying hungry and being able to continue to find additional resources to build your skill set and your strengths, right? Because you can't, as much as those of us like me like to check the box, would love to just read a book and know everything, right? This is a good first step. But don't only read this book, right? It's a great book, and then keep going, right? That's I think, and the same thing for financial peace, probably too, right? Great book to get you grounded, get you out of debt, get you going in the right direction, but don't stop managing your finances afterwards, right?
And I'm sure he would say the same thing. The funny thing is, I don't, on a typical year, I'll go through about 40 books. There's a lot of overlapping of ideas from book to book to book.
But I think you're unique. I think a lot of busy executives want to go to like an EntreLeadership conference and then not have to do it ever again, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I could be wrong.
And it will, and it's definitely going to help. Do go to it, but you have to practice it because, like any concept, there's like, hey, I learned the material, but what does it look like? As one of his chapters just flat out says, how do you catch your employees doing good? That takes practice. And how do I catch, the way you greeted Mrs. Smith as she walked in the door, that was top notch. But that takes practice instead of just like, you're doing good.
Right.
There's a difference there. And he talks a lot about how just the nitty gritty, A, then B, then C. And this is also where intellectual, just knowing this stuff, ties into actually practicing and where coaching and consulting come in. We have to learn how to do it. Just like we can talk about basketball, but shooting the free throw, shooting the lands with the opposite hand, what does that look like? Yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's my encouragement, sort of book review here, my summary at least, is thinking about it from the lens of, hey, you've learned a lot. It's a great book. We'll talk about some life applications certainly soon, or some use cases, excuse me. But then really trying to think about what are those the deeper stuff that you got to just keep digging in, right? So leaders got to be, I think, time management, right? I think one of the things he didn't talk about in time management, for example, was the importance of leaders having margin. right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so the margin to keep learning. Like he talked about how busy his calendar was and how full his day was, and I was thinking, gosh, I feel bad for him. I wish he could find a way to have even more margin for his life to be, and I'm sure he does this probably, but he didn't talk about it, at least in parts that I was able to get through, but having that margin to read the next book, having that margin to be thinking ahead, having that margin to be, informally coaching, having that margin to walk the halls, having that margin, like he did some of it, but it was,
and I think he does do that.
He probably
just
does.
Did not
yeah, it just didn't come
in the
through.
book.
Yeah.
But next week, we're going to talk business application for this book. And the fascinating thing is he doesn't talk about it in the book, but in their, a number of years ago, we paid for 2 years of his EntreLeadership training at our business. So we even use his entire hiring practice. And to the point of how many interviews our company uses, to what we ask of our employee or team members. And one thing that happened, we thought we had this stud team member hired last week. And he asks all of his team members for one thing, and I'll talk about this next week, and we do the same thing too. When we ask this future team member, who was supposed to start this week, of what Dave asked his team, the person immediately yelled at us over email and, quit. So I'll talk about that next week. And I shouldn't say they quit. They never started.
They never started.
The first place.
Okay.
And I'll tell you the email.
They didn't ghost you, at least.
No, they didn't ghost us.
Had that
They
happen.
were mad. And
That you asked them about EntreLeadership.
I asked them something that comes up in EntreLeadership that Dave asked his entire team.
Got it.
So we'll talk about this next
week.
week. And I said, I'll tell you what I told my COO, because they're like, what happened? This person got really, really mad at us. All I did was what Dave told us to do. And we'll see, hey, was that a good idea or not?
Let's talk about it next week.
But next week, we'll talk, business application of EntreLeadership.
Yep.
But if you haven't, between now and then, we'll post this book on Amazon or even Dave's website. You can buy it directly from, I think his group's company called Lampo Group or whatever it's called. You can buy it there. Do buy the book EntreLeadership. It's like the best $10 to $25 you can spend on your book, on yourself, and get just business 101 if you haven't read it yet. But until then,
sounds good. Next week.
Yep. Until then, reach out to us on theconsultantofthecoach.com, and whatever platform you're listening to this, whether it be Apple Podcasts, YouTube, TikTok, you name it, please hit the subscribe button so more people see this content. But until then, see you guys.
Take care.